Sarah Mitchell's hands froze mid-signature on Luna's adoption papers, her pen hovering over the document as Judge Roberts cleared his throat in the packed Durango County Courthouse. The courtroom fell silent, except for the mechanical wheeze of Eleanor Hartwell's oxygen tank from her wheelchair in the front row. "This isn't just about one animal, Your Honor." Sarah's voice cracked as she glanced at the transport cage where Luna sat motionless, her mismatched eyes, one blue as morning sky, one amber as autumn leaves, fixed on Sarah with an intelligence that defied explanation. "This is about what kind of people we choose to be when love meets the law." Eleanor's weathered hand gripped her wheelchair armrest, knuckles white as bleached bone. Marcus Thompson shifted uncomfortably in his government suit, the scar on his neck from a childhood wolf attack suddenly burning hot. The bailiff's radio crackled. "Federal transport en route." Sarah remembered finding Luna broken and bleeding in that roadside ditch 3 months ago, never imagining this moment. Now everything hung in the balance: her veterinary license, Eleanor's failing heart, and the shocking truth about Luna's origin that could destroy them all. Who was Luna really? And why were powerful people so desperate to take her away? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 3 months earlier, Sarah Mitchell had believed her biggest worry was the stack of overdue bills threatening to bury her dreams. At 28, she carried the weight of $120,000 in student loans and an $80,000 business loan for Paws Heart's veterinary clinic like anchors around her neck. The small practice occupied the ground floor of a converted Victorian house on Durango's Main Street, with Sarah's cramped apartment directly above, close enough that she could hear every whimper from the animals below, each sound a reminder of why she'd chosen this financially ruinous but emotionally necessary path. 2 years had passed since the phone call that shattered her world. Her parents, driving home from her veterinary school graduation, had been killed instantly when a drunk driver ran a red light. The grief still hit her at unexpected moments, when she reached for the phone to share good news, when she spotted their favorite coffee blend at the grocery store, when the loneliness of her small apartment became too heavy to bear. She'd thrown herself into building the clinic as a way to honor their memory. But the isolation was killing her slowly, one quiet evening at a time. Eleanor Hartwell lived just 6 blocks away in a sprawling Victorian that had once housed a family of 7. Now, at 72, she rattled around the empty rooms like a ghost, haunting her own life. The house still smelled faintly of her late husband William's pipe tobacco, though he'd been gone 5 years, a casualty of the war that never left his mind, even decades after Korea. Their son Michael's bedroom remained untouched, frozen in time since the day the army chaplain had knocked on her door with news from Afghanistan. Eleanor's carefully maintained exterior, the perfectly tended garden, the weekly church attendance, the cheerful greetings to neighbors, masked a heart slowly dying from disuse. She'd been a brilliant woman once, her mind sharp enough to earn a PhD in genetics when few women dared dream of such things. But that part of her life remained locked away, too dangerous to remember, too painful to share. Now she measured her days in doctor's appointments and prescription bottles, her weak heart a constant reminder that time was running out to matter again. Marcus Thompson approached his job with the rigid precision of a man who'd learned early that chaos meant death. At 45, he'd spent 2 decades with Colorado Wildlife Services, building a reputation for fairness tempered by an absolute commitment to public safety. His colleagues respected his thoroughness, his neighbors appreciated his quiet competence. But underneath the professional exterior lay the scar tissue of a 12-year-old boy who'd nearly died in a wolf attack, saved only by his father's rifle and a lifetime of nightmares. His daughter Emma, now 16, had retreated so far into her autism that some days Marcus wondered if he'd already lost her too. The specialists spoke of breakthroughs and therapies, but Marcus saw only a brilliant child trapped in a world that moved too fast and spoke too loud. Every decision he made was filtered through one question: how do I keep her safe in a world that had already hurt them both so deeply? The rain hammered Highway 550 with the fury of a Colorado spring storm as Sarah drove toward her clinic at 6 in the morning, her windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the downpour. She'd been called out to the Hendersons' ranch for a difficult calving that had stretched through the night, and exhaustion weighed on her shoulders like a lead blanket. The radio droned softly about flood warnings and road closures, but Sarah's mind wandered to the stack of bills waiting on her desk. Electric, insurance, medical supplies, each one a reminder of how precarious her dream had become. Movement in the roadside ditch caught her eye through the rain-streaked passenger window. Sarah slowed, squinting through the gloom. There, huddled against the concrete culvert, was what appeared to be a small dog. Her veterinarian instincts overrode her exhaustion as she pulled onto the shoulder, hazard lights flashing. The animal didn't flee as she approached, which immediately raised red flags. In her experience, healthy wild animals didn't wait around for humans to find them. As Sarah knelt beside the shivering creature, her breath caught. This wasn't just any abandoned puppy. The animal's eyes were the most striking feature, one a brilliant blue like summer sky, the other a warm amber that seemed to glow in the dim morning light. The condition was called heterochromia, not uncommon in certain breeds, but something about this animal's gaze held an intelligence that made Sarah's skin prickle. The puppy's paws were disproportionately large, suggesting it would grow much bigger than its current 15-pound frame indicated. More concerning were the injuries. A clearly broken front leg hung at an unnatural angle, and infected wounds dotted the animal's matted fur. Someone had hurt this creature, and recently. Around its neck hung a weathered leather collar, too large for the puppy's current size, with a metal tag bearing only numbers, LX7749. No name, no phone number, just those cryptic digits that meant nothing to Sarah but somehow felt important. "Easy, girl," Sarah whispered, though she wasn't entirely sure of the animal's gender. The puppy, she'd decided to think of it as female, didn't struggle as Sarah carefully lifted her. Instead, those mismatched eyes fixed on Sarah's face with what seemed like gratitude mixed with something deeper, more human than any animal expression Sarah had ever encountered. The drive to the clinic passed in a blur of concern and professional assessment. The puppy lay quietly in the passenger seat, never whimpering despite what had to be considerable pain. When Sarah spoke to her, a habit she'd developed with all her patients, the animal's ears perked up with an attentiveness that suggested genuine comprehension rather than simple conditioning. At the clinic, Sarah worked with the focused intensity that had made her professors praise her surgical instincts. The X-rays revealed a clean break that would heal well with proper setting, but the infected wounds required immediate attention. As she cleaned and sutured, Sarah found herself talking to her patient in the soothing tones she'd learned from her father, who'd been a country veterinarian before retirement. "You're going to be just fine, sweetheart," she murmured, injecting antibiotics. "Someone really did a number on you, didn't they? But you're safe now. I'm going to call you Luna, for those beautiful moon-colored eyes of yours." Luna. The name felt right somehow, and Sarah could swear the animal's tail moved slightly in approval. Throughout the 2-hour procedure, Luna never once tried to bite or scratch, even during the most painful moments. She watched Sarah's every movement with those extraordinary eyes, as if memorizing her face, studying her movements, learning her scent. It was during the final bandaging that Sarah noticed Luna's reaction to other animals. Mrs. Patterson's elderly cat, boarding while the family vacationed, had begun yowling from the kennel area. an unusual outburst from the normally placid Persian. When Sarah checked, she found Duchess pressed against the back of her cage, fur standing on end, pupils dilated with obvious terror. The other boarding animals showed similar distress. The Doberman mix that usually barked at everything cowered silently, and the parrot that greeted everyone with cheerful squawks had fallen completely mute. Sarah frowned, checking Luna's vitals again. Everything appeared normal for a young dog of mixed breeding, probably husky or Malamute given the size and coloring. But animals had instincts humans had long since dulled, and their collective fear of Luna suggested something Sarah's clinical training couldn't explain. As she settled Luna into a comfortable recovery kennel, Sarah made a mental note to research the numbers on the collar. LX7749 had to mean something, perhaps a breeder's registration or a microchip number. But as she locked up the clinic that evening, leaving Luna resting peacefully with a bowl of water and soft blankets, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she'd stumbled into something much more complicated than a simple animal rescue. The other animals remained agitated all night, their distressed sounds drifting up through the old building's thin floors to Sarah's apartment above, where she lay awake wondering what kind of creature she'd truly brought home. 2 weeks after Luna's arrival, Sarah began to question everything she thought she knew about canine development. The injured puppy she'd rescued had transformed into a 45-pound adolescent, with legs that seemed to grow overnight and a face that was losing its puppy softness with alarming speed. Luna's snout had elongated, her ears had become more pointed, and her gait carried a fluid grace that reminded Sarah uncomfortably of nature documentaries about wild predators. More unsettling were Luna's behavioral quirks. Every night at exactly 3:33 a.m., Luna would begin a low, mournful howling that seemed to echo from somewhere deep in her chest. The sound was unlike any dog vocalization Sarah had heard in her veterinary training, too melodic to be distress, too purposeful to be random. Neighbors had begun calling to complain, but when Sarah tried to comfort Luna during these episodes, the animal would look past her as if responding to something Sarah couldn't see or hear. The afternoon howling sessions occurred precisely at 7:17 p.m., regardless of sunset times or feeding schedules. Luna would position herself in the clinic's main examination room, face the north-facing window, and release the same haunting call. During these times, she seemed completely unaware of Sarah's presence, lost in some communication that transcended human understanding. Most disturbing was Luna's apparent interaction with an invisible companion. Sarah would often find Luna playing tug-of-war with empty air, her head tilted at the precise angle needed to accommodate another animal's mouth on a rope toy that remained stationary in Luna's jaws. She would run in circles around the examination table, perfectly paced, as if chasing another creature, occasionally stopping to look up expectantly at a spot roughly 3 feet off the ground, exactly where another dog's head might be. The other animal's fear of Luna had not diminished. In fact, it had intensified as Luna grew. Dogs being walked past the clinic would stop dead in their tracks, hackles raised, whimpering to be taken in the opposite direction. Cats disappeared from the neighborhood entirely. Even wild birds seemed to avoid the airspace above the building, creating an eerie silence that customers noticed immediately. Sarah's concern reached a breaking point when Luna began refusing to cross certain thresholds. The doorway between the clinic's main room and the surgical suite became an invisible barrier that Luna would not breach, no matter how Sarah coaxed or commanded. She would approach the threshold eagerly, then stop, as if hitting a glass wall, backing away with obvious distress. Similar reactions occurred at the entrance to Sarah's apartment upstairs and oddly at the threshold of the storage room where Sarah kept the industrial-grade cleaning supplies. The financial pressure of Luna's presence was mounting. Her specialized diet. Luna rejected all commercial dog foods, accepting only raw meat that cost Sarah nearly $50 per week. Combined with the gradual exodus of customers who found their pets traumatized by visits to the clinic, was pushing Sarah toward bankruptcy faster than her original timeline had projected. The stack of unpaid bills on her desk had grown to include past due notices, and the bank had called twice about her business loan payment. It was Eleanor Hartwell's visit that transformed Sarah's vague concerns into concrete fear. The elderly woman had brought her ancient Persian cat, Whiskers, for a routine vaccination, a monthly ritual that helped Eleanor feel connected to the world of caregiving she'd left behind. But when Eleanor caught sight of Luna through the examination room window, her reaction was unlike anything Sarah had witnessed. The cat carrier slipped from Eleanor's arthritic hands, clanging against the linoleum floor as the old woman's face drained of all color. Her lips moved soundlessly, forming words Sarah couldn't hear, and her eyes, sharp despite her 72 years, fixed on Luna with an expression of pure terror mixed with something that looked disturbingly like recognition. "Mrs. Hartwell, are you all right?" Sarah rushed to Eleanor's side, but the woman was backing toward the door, her walker scraping against the floor in her haste to escape. "Dear God," Eleanor whispered, her voice hoarse with an emotion Sarah couldn't identify. "What have they done? What have they done this time?" Before Sarah could ask what she meant, Eleanor had abandoned both her cat and her walker, moving with surprising speed toward the exit. Her arthritic hands fumbled with the door handle as she cast fearful glances back at Luna, who had begun that low, purposeful whining that usually preceded her evening howling session. "Mrs. Hartwell, wait," Sarah called. But Eleanor was already halfway to her car, moving faster than Sarah had ever seen the elderly woman move. She drove away without collecting Whiskers, leaving Sarah standing in the doorway with a growing sense that Luna represented something far more dangerous than she'd imagined. That evening, as Luna began her precisely timed 7:17 p.m. howling session, Sarah made the decision that would change everything. She logged onto her computer and ordered a comprehensive DNA test from the most reputable animal genetics laboratory she could find. The cost, $800 she absolutely could not afford, would have to come from her grocery money and the emergency fund she'd been saving for equipment repairs. As she filled out the paperwork, Luna's howling reached a crescendo that seemed to vibrate through the old building's bones. Sarah paused in her typing, struck by a thought that made her hands tremble slightly. Eleanor Hartwell had recognized Luna, had known something about her origins that inspired genuine terror in a woman who'd lived through 7 decades of life's challenges. The sample collection kit would arrive in 3 days. The results would take another week to process. Sarah looked down at Luna, who had finished her howling and was now sitting calmly beside the desk, those mismatched eyes watching Sarah with an intelligence that no longer seemed endearing but rather unsettling in its depth. Whatever truth the DNA test revealed, Sarah suspected it would explain Eleanor's reaction and possibly destroy the fragile life she'd built in Durango. But as Luna placed one oversized paw on Sarah's foot in a gesture of trust and affection, Sarah knew she was already too emotionally invested to turn back, regardless of the consequences waiting in those laboratory results. The DNA results arrived on a Tuesday morning that would forever divide Sarah's life into before and after. She stared at the laboratory report with hands that trembled so violently she could barely hold the paper steady. The clinical language was unmistakable. Luna was 73% gray wolf, 27% Siberian husky. Not a dog with wolf-like features, but an actual wolf hybrid, illegal to possess in Colorado without federal and state permits that took years to obtain and cost thousands of dollars Sarah didn't have. The implications crashed over her like an avalanche. Under Colorado law, she had 48 hours to report Luna's true nature, or face felony charges that would not only destroy her veterinary career but potentially land her in prison. The fine for keeping an illegal wolf hybrid was $10,000, plus an additional $500 for every day the animal remained in her possession. Sarah's calculator confirmed what her sinking heart already knew. She was looking at financial ruin that would eclipse even her current debt crisis. But the numbers on a page couldn't capture the emotional devastation of losing Luna. Over the past month, the wolf hybrid had become more than a patient or even a pet. She'd become Sarah's family, the warm presence that greeted her every morning and the loyal companion who'd begun to heal the isolation that had consumed Sarah since her parents' death. Luna seemed to sense Sarah's distress, pressing close against her legs with that uncanny ability to read human emotions that Sarah now understood came from her wolf heritage. The decision of what to do was taken from Sarah's hands when her clinic door chimed at exactly 2:47 p.m. Marcus Thompson entered with the measured stride of someone accustomed to delivering bad news, his wildlife services badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. He was younger than Sarah had expected, maybe mid-40s, with graying temples and the kind of rigid posture that spoke of military training or law enforcement background. "Dr. Mitchell," Marcus said, his voice professionally courteous but carrying an underlying steel. "I'm here about the wolf hybrid you're harboring." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. "I don't know what you're talking about." Marcus pulled out a tablet, swiping to reveal what Sarah recognized as her DNA test results. "Anonymous tip led us to check with the laboratory. These results were flagged automatically in our system." His eyes swept the clinic, landing on the examination room where Luna was visible through the glass partition. "That animal needs to be turned over to our custody immediately." The moment Marcus's gaze met Luna's, everything changed. The wolf hybrid, who had been calmly chewing a rope toy, suddenly rose to her full height, nearly as tall as a small pony when standing on her hind legs. Her lips pulled back to reveal teeth that looked less like a domestic dog's and more like the business end of a wild predator. The growl that emerged from Luna's throat was unlike anything Sarah had heard from her before, a sound that seemed to reach back through thousands of years of evolutionary memory to when humans and wolves were not friends but competitors for survival. Marcus stumbled backward, his hand instinctively moving toward the pepper spray on his belt. In that moment, his carefully maintained professional demeanor cracked, revealing something raw and terrified underneath. Sarah saw his fingers unconsciously touch a faded scar on his neck, a thin, white line that spoke of old violence and trauma. 72 hours, Marcus said, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. "You have 72 hours to make arrangements for transfer to an appropriate facility, or I'll return with a court order and animal control officers." He handed Sarah an official notice that might as well have been a death sentence. "I strongly advise you not to try to hide her or leave the county. Federal authorities monitor all wolf hybrid relocations." After Marcus left, Sarah sank into her desk chair, staring at the official papers that would separate her from Luna forever. The legal language was clear. Luna would be taken to a wildlife sanctuary in Wyoming where she would live in captivity for the remainder of her life. No visitors allowed, no contact with her previous owner. For all practical purposes, Sarah would never see Luna again. It was then that Eleanor Hartwell appeared, moving slowly through the clinic door with her walker, but displaying a determination that made her seem younger than her 72 years. She'd obviously been watching from across the street, waiting for Marcus to leave. "That man," Eleanor said without preamble, "has no idea what he's dealing with." She studied Luna through the glass partition, her expression a complex mix of familiarity and regret. "And neither do you, child." Sarah looked up from the papers, desperate for any lifeline. "Mrs. Hartwell, do you know something about Luna? When you saw her before, you seemed to recognize her." Eleanor's weathered hands gripped her walker so tightly her knuckles went white. For a long moment she stood silent, as if weighing secrets against consequences. Finally, she spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "I used to work in animal research, Sarah, back when the government was interested in different approaches to breeding programs." Eleanor's eyes never left Luna. "That collar she was wearing when you found her, those numbers mean something." LX7749. It's a laboratory designation. The words hit Sarah like physical blows. Luna came from a laboratory? Not just any laboratory. Eleanor moved closer to the glass, and Sarah was amazed to see Luna's aggressive posture soften slightly. A classified program that was shut down 15 years ago. If that animal is who I think she is, then someone has been hiding her for a very long time. Eleanor's revelation explained so much. Luna's unusual intelligence, her precise behavioral patterns, the fear she inspired in other animals, and most importantly, why someone with Eleanor's background would react with such terror upon seeing her. But it also raised questions that made Sarah's head spin. If Luna had escaped from a government program 15 years ago, she would have been just a puppy then. How had she survived? Who had been caring for her? And why had she ended up injured and abandoned on a Colorado highway? "There's something else," Eleanor continued, her voice growing stronger as if unburdening herself of long-held secrets gave her energy. "Marcus Thompson, that man who was just here, he has history with wolf hybrids. Bad history. When he was 12 years old, he was attacked by an animal just like Luna, nearly died, spent 3 months in the hospital and another year in therapy, learning to walk again." This explained Marcus's visceral fear response, but it also made Sarah's situation infinitely worse. She wasn't just dealing with a bureaucrat enforcing regulations, she was facing someone whose childhood trauma made him see Luna as a mortal threat to public safety. "Mrs. Hartwell," Sarah said desperately, "is there anything we can do? Any legal way to keep Luna?" Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, studying Luna with the intense focus of someone making a critical decision. When she finally spoke, her words carried the weight of someone who'd spent decades regretting past inaction. "Child, I made some terrible choices in my research career, choices that still keep me awake at night." She turned to face Sarah directly. "But I learned something important about animals like Luna. They're not just hybrids, they're bridges. Bridges between the wild world we've lost and the domestic world we've built. That animal in there has the capacity to heal things we didn't even know were broken." As if responding to Eleanor's words, Luna approached the glass partition and placed one massive paw against it. Her mismatched eyes, that extraordinary blue and amber combination, looked directly at Eleanor with what could only be described as recognition. "She remembers you," Sarah breathed. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back for decades. "I was part of the team that created her bloodline, Sarah. And when the program was terminated, I thought all the animals had been—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The weight of this revelation settled over Sarah like a shroud. Luna wasn't just a wolf hybrid. She was possibly the last survivor of a government program that Eleanor had helped design. The old woman's guilt and Sarah's love for Luna had collided in a perfect storm of redemption and hope. "Help me save her," Sarah whispered. "Please, I can't lose her." Eleanor straightened her shoulders with a resolve that made her seem 10 years younger. "I have some resources, child, and I know things about that program that certain people would prefer to keep buried. If we're going to fight this, we need to do it smart, and we need to do it fast." As the afternoon sun slanted through the clinic windows, 2 women separated by nearly half a century found themselves united in an impossible mission, saving a wolf hybrid who represented both the sins of the past and the possibility of redemption. The next morning brought Marcus Thompson's teenage daughter Emma to the clinic in an unexpected twist that would change everything. The 16-year-old girl had autism spectrum disorder, and according to her father's hastily whispered explanation to Sarah at the door, she'd had a complete meltdown when she learned about Luna's impending removal. Emma hadn't spoken a coherent word in 3 years, communicating mainly through hand gestures and drawings, but she'd somehow made it clear that she desperately needed to see the moon-eyed dog before it disappeared forever. Marcus stood rigid in the clinic's waiting area, his jaw clenched with the internal war between his professional duty and his daughter's needs. 5 minutes, he told Sarah tersely. That's all I can allow. And I'm staying right here to supervise. Emma moved with the characteristic hesitation of someone navigating a world that constantly overwhelmed her senses. But when she caught sight of Luna through the glass partition, something extraordinary happened. The girl's usual anxious fidgeting stopped completely. She approached the examination room with a purposefulness that Marcus had never seen from his daughter, her dark eyes fixed on Luna with laser focus. Luna, for her part, seemed to sense something special about Emma. The wolf hybrid rose from her resting position and moved to the glass with unusual gentleness, settling into a sitting position that brought her massive head level with Emma's face. When Emma pressed her palm against the glass, Luna mirrored the gesture with her paw, creating a connection that transcended the barrier between them. "Can I—" Emma's voice was rusty from disuse, barely audible, but it was the first time Marcus had heard his daughter attempt speech in months. "Can I go inside?" Marcus started to protest, his protective instincts warring with the miracle of hearing Emma's voice, but Sarah was already moving toward the door. "It's okay," she said softly, recognizing the moment for what it was. "Luna is very gentle with people she trusts." The meeting between Emma and Luna defied every assumption Marcus had held about wolf hybrids. His daughter, who typically recoiled from physical contact and became overwhelmed by new environments, sat calmly on the examination room floor as Luna approached with careful, deliberate movements. The wolf hybrid seemed to understand Emma's need for space and control, allowing the girl to set the pace of their interaction. When Emma finally reached out to touch Luna's fur, her face transformed with a peace Marcus hadn't seen since before her autism symptoms became pronounced. Luna remained perfectly still, her breathing slow and steady as Emma buried her fingers in the thick coat around her neck. The girl's usual vocal stems, the humming and clicking sounds that helped her self-regulate, quieted to nothing. "She's warm," Emma whispered, her voice growing stronger with each word. "And her heartbeat is so slow, like she's not scared of anything." Marcus watched in stunned silence as his daughter, who had spent years locked in her own internal world, began to narrate her experience with Luna. She described the texture of the wolf hybrid's fur, the way Luna's ears moved to track sounds, and the feeling of calm that seemed to radiate from the animal like heat from a fire. "Dad?" Emma said suddenly, looking directly at Marcus for the first time in weeks. "Why do you want to take her away?" "She's not mean, she's just different, like me." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. In that moment, he saw Luna not through the lens of his childhood trauma, but through his daughter's eyes, as a creature that was misunderstood, feared for qualities that were simply part of her nature. The parallel between Luna's situation and Emma's daily struggles with a world that didn't accommodate her differences was impossible to ignore. But before Marcus could respond, the clinic door chimed with the arrival of someone who would shatter whatever peace they'd found. Dr. Elena Martinez entered with the confident stride of someone accustomed to getting what she wanted, her federal credentials clearly visible on the lanyard around her neck. She was an elegant woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair and sharp eyes that immediately catalogued every detail of the scene before her. "Dr. Mitchell," she said, her voice carrying a slight accent that suggested Spanish as a first language. "I'm Dr. Elena Martinez with the Federal Wildlife Management Division. I understand you're harboring a wolf hybrid that belongs to the United States government." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "I don't understand." "Luna was abandoned. I rescued her from the side of the road." Dr. Martinez smiled, but there was something cold about the expression. "The animal you call Luna is actually designated as Subject LX7749, part of a classified breeding program that was discontinued 15 years ago. She represents significant federal investment and must be returned to our custody for proper disposition." The word disposition sent chills down Sarah's spine. It was a clinical term that could mean anything from relocation to euthanasia. "But she's not government property anymore. She was abandoned, left to die." "I saved her life. Abandonment doesn't negate federal ownership claims," Dr. Martinez replied smoothly. "The animal was created using taxpayer funds and remains government property regardless of her current circumstances. I have court orders authorizing immediate transfer to a federal facility." Marcus found himself in an impossible position. As a government employee, he was obligated to support Dr. Martinez's claim, but watching Emma's face crumple with despair made him question everything he'd believed about duty and regulations. His daughter had found something precious in Luna, a connection that had brought her back from the isolated world of autism, and now federal bureaucracy was threatening to destroy it. Eleanor chose that moment to arrive, moving through the clinic door with more speed than her walker usually allowed. When her eyes landed on Dr. Martinez, her reaction was immediate and visceral. The old woman's face went pale, her hands trembling on her walker's handles. "You," Eleanor whispered, her voice carrying decades of suppressed emotion. "I thought you were dead." Dr. Martinez turned, and for the first time since her arrival, her composure cracked slightly. "Dr. Eleanor Chen Hartwell, I should have known you'd surface eventually. Still trying to sabotage important research, I see." The tension in the room ratcheted up exponentially as Sarah realized she was witnessing a confrontation between former colleagues with a history that predated Luna's existence. Eleanor's revelation about her research background suddenly took on new significance. "That program was terminated for good reason," Eleanor said, her voice gaining strength. "After what happened to the other subjects, after what we learned about the psychological damage we were causing, the decision was made to end it permanently. The decision was made by politicians and bleeding hearts who couldn't see the bigger picture," Dr. Martinez shot back. "LX7749 represents years of work, millions of dollars in research, and genetic material that could revolutionize our understanding of human-animal bonding. She's far too valuable to waste on sentiment." Emma, still sitting beside Luna, looked up at the adults with the keen perception that often accompanied autism. "She's talking about Luna like she's a thing," the girl said clearly. "But Luna isn't a thing. She's a friend." The simple truth from a 16-year-old girl cut through all the bureaucratic language and scientific justification like a knife. Luna wasn't just a research subject or government property. She was a living being capable of forming bonds, providing comfort, and inspiring connection in ways that no laboratory protocol could quantify. Dr. Martinez's response was swift and final. "I'm afraid sentiment doesn't alter legal reality. I'll be back tomorrow morning with federal marshals to collect the animal. I suggest you use the remaining time to say your goodbyes." As she left, the clinic fell into stunned silence. Sarah looked around at the unlikely alliance that had formed around Luna, a grieving veterinarian, an elderly woman with secrets, a conflicted government official, and an autistic teenager who'd found her voice through connection with a wolf hybrid. They had less than 24 hours to find a solution that could satisfy federal law while preserving the relationships Luna had begun to heal. The clock was ticking, and tomorrow would bring either salvation or the destruction of everything they'd all come to value about Luna's presence in their lives. The stakes had never been higher, and the odds had never seemed more impossible. The breaking point came at dawn, when Sarah discovered Eleanor collapsed in the clinic's parking lot. The elderly woman lay crumpled beside her car, her walker overturned and her face gray with the unmistakable pallor of cardiac distress. Sarah's emergency medical training kicked in as she checked Eleanor's pulse, weak and irregular, and immediately called for an ambulance while cradling the woman's head in her lap. "The files," Eleanor whispered through blue-tinged lips as the paramedics loaded her onto a stretcher. "Hidden behind the bookshelf. Second panel from the left. Everything about Luna. Everything about what we did." Her words dissolved into labored breathing as the ambulance doors closed, leaving Sarah standing alone in the early morning silence with the weight of Eleanor's cryptic message. At Durango General Hospital, Eleanor's condition stabilized but remained critical. The cardiologist, a soft-spoken man named Dr. Patel, explained that the stress of recent events had triggered a massive heart attack. Eleanor's chances of survival were uncertain, and even if she pulled through, her heart was severely damaged. The woman who had become Sarah's unlikely ally in the fight to save Luna was now fighting for her own life. Sarah sat beside Eleanor's hospital bed, holding the frail hand of someone who had become more than a neighbor. She'd become the grandmother Sarah had lost years before. The monitors beeped steadily, marking time that was running out for both Eleanor and Luna. Tomorrow morning, Dr. Martinez would return with federal marshals, and without Eleanor's promised help, Sarah had no legal recourse to prevent Luna's seizure. "I'm so sorry," Sarah whispered to the unconscious woman. "I never should have involved you in this. The stress, the confrontation with Dr. Martinez, it's my fault you're here." Eleanor's eyes fluttered open, focusing with effort on Sarah's face. "Child," she breathed, her voice barely audible above the medical equipment. "Not your fault. This fight, been building for 15 years. Time I stopped running from what we did." With tremendous effort, Eleanor reached for the call button to summon a nurse. When the woman arrived, Eleanor made a request that surprised everyone. She wanted paper and pen to write something down. Her handwriting was shaky, but the words were clear, a combination to a safe hidden behind her bookshelf, along with instructions for finding documentation that could change everything. "Those files," Eleanor whispered to Sarah when they were alone again, "prove Luna isn't government property. Prove what Martinez really wants her for." "But Sarah—" Eleanor's grip on Sarah's hand tightened with surprising strength. "Some truths are dangerous. Once you know what we did, what I helped create, you can't unknow it." Sarah felt the weight of Eleanor's warning, but also the desperation of running out of options. "I have to try. I can't let them take Luna." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears that spoke of decades of regret. "We thought we were creating something beautiful, healing the ancient bond between humans and wolves. But the program, it went wrong. So many animals died, Sarah. So many suffered because of our arrogance." The confession hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Sarah understood now why Eleanor had reacted with such terror upon first seeing Luna. She wasn't just recognizing a wolf hybrid. She was confronting a living reminder of her participation in something that had caused immense suffering. "Luna was supposed to be different," Eleanor continued, her voice growing weaker. "The last attempt to get it right. When the program was shut down, I hoped all the animals had been humanely euthanized. Finding out Luna survived, that she's been living wild all these years." Eleanor's breathing became more labored. "She represents both our greatest failure and our only chance at redemption." Dr. Patel returned with a grim expression that confirmed Sarah's worst fears. Eleanor's heart was failing rapidly, and the next few hours would be critical. The stress of the past weeks, combined with her advanced age and underlying cardiac issues, had pushed her system beyond its limits. As Sarah prepared to leave the hospital to retrieve Eleanor's hidden files, Marcus Thompson appeared in the doorway. His usually rigid posture had softened, and he carried a small bouquet of flowers that looked incongruous in his large hands. "How is she?" he asked quietly, surprising Sarah with the genuine concern in his voice. "Not good. The doctors aren't sure she'll make it through the night." Sarah studied Marcus's face, seeing something there she hadn't noticed before, a depth of feeling that his professional demeanor usually concealed. Marcus moved to Eleanor's bedside, his movements gentle as he placed the flowers on the nightstand. "Mrs. Hartwell has been sending Emma cards and books for the past 3 years," he said softly. "Ever since my wife left, and Emma's autism symptoms became more pronounced. I never knew why, but Eleanor seemed to understand what we were going through in ways that even the specialists didn't." The revelation added another layer to Eleanor's character, a woman who had spent her later years quietly caring for others while carrying the burden of her research past. Marcus's gratitude explained why he'd allowed Emma to visit Luna despite his professional obligations. "She's been watching over all of us," Sarah realized. "Probably knew about Luna long before I found her." Marcus nodded slowly. "Dr. Martinez mentioned that Eleanor was part of the original research team. If that's true, and if Eleanor has information that could help Luna—" He trailed off, his duty as a government employee warring with his growing understanding of what Luna meant to his daughter. "There are files," Sarah said, making a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. "Eleanor told me where to find them. But Marcus, if I show you what's in those files, there's no going back. You'll have to choose between following orders and doing what's right." Marcus looked down at Eleanor's peaceful face, then back at Sarah. For the first time since they'd met, he seemed less like a government official and more like a father who'd watched his daughter find her voice through connection with a wolf hybrid. "Show me the files," he said quietly. "It's time I learned the truth about what we're really fighting for." Eleanor's Victorian house felt like a mausoleum as Sarah and Marcus stepped through the front door, the weight of their mission pressing down on them like a physical force. The combination Eleanor had scrawled on her hospital notepad led them to a hidden safe behind the mahogany bookshelf in what had once been William's study. As Sarah moved the heavy volumes aside, Hemingway, Steinbeck, volumes on genetics and animal behavior, she found the concealed panel exactly where Eleanor had indicated. The safe opened with a metallic click that seemed to echo through the silent house. Inside, Sarah found a treasure trove of documents that made her blood run cold. Research files, photographs, and correspondence that painted a picture of a government program far more extensive and morally questionable than anything she could have imagined. The letterhead on many documents bore the seal of the Department of Defense, and the classification stamps were so high that Sarah wondered how Eleanor had managed to smuggle these files out when the program ended. The photographs were the most disturbing. Image after image showed wolf-dog hybrids in various stages of development, many bearing visible signs of distress, malnutrition, and psychological trauma. Clinical notes describe behavioral abnormalities, failed breeding attempts, and what the researchers euphemistically termed subject termination, when animals proved unsuitable for the program's goals. Sarah's veterinary training allowed her to read between the clinical language and understand the suffering these animals had endured. "Jesus Christ," Marcus whispered, studying a photograph of a hybrid that looked remarkably similar to Luna. "How many animals were involved in this program?" Sarah flipped through the files, her heart sinking with each page. According to this manifest, over 200 animals were bred over a 7-year period. Most died from genetic defects, behavioral problems, or— She paused at a particularly damning document. or were euthanized when they became too aggressive for handlers to manage safely. But it was the correspondence between Eleanor and her research partner that revealed the most shocking truth. Dr. Elena Martinez, the woman who had appeared at Sarah's clinic with federal credentials, had been Eleanor's primary collaborator on the Wolf Hybrid program. More disturbing still, Martinez had opposed the program's termination and had been suspected of continuing research independently after the official shutdown. A memo dated 15 years earlier, signed by Eleanor herself, documented her growing concerns about Martinez's methods and her recommendation that the program be immediately terminated. Eleanor had written, "Dr. Martinez's pursuit of increasingly aggressive hybrid traits shows a fundamental misunderstanding of our mission. We set out to create animals capable of forming therapeutic bonds with humans, not to develop biological weapons. Her recent experiments with trauma conditioning are not only ethically questionable, but potentially dangerous to both the animals and their handlers." The response from Martinez was chilling in its clinical detachment. Dr. Hartwell's emotional attachment to the subjects is compromising her scientific objectivity. The military applications of properly conditioned wolf hybrids represent a significant strategic advantage. I recommend her immediate removal from the project. Sarah's hands trembled as she read the final documents in the file, Eleanor's personal notes from the program's last days. The elderly scientist had detailed her growing horror as Martinez's experiments became more extreme, culminating in Eleanor's decision to secretly relocate the 3 surviving animals before they could be subjected to what Martinez termed advanced conditioning protocols. "Luna was one of 3 survivors," Sarah read aloud. "Eleanor smuggled them out the night before the program was officially terminated. She placed them with families in remote areas, hoping they could live normal lives as pets." Sarah's voice broke as she continued. "The other 2 died within months, one from genetic complications, the other from behavioral problems that made placement impossible." Marcus studied the shipping records that documented Luna's placement. "She was given to a ranch family in Wyoming, name of Roberts." He looked up at Sarah with dawning understanding. "The farmer who had Luna, he wasn't the one who found her. He was the one Eleanor trusted to keep her safe." The implications were staggering. Luna hadn't been abandoned recently. She'd been living a secret life for 15 years, protected by a network of people who understood her true nature. The farmer's reluctance to turn her over to authorities wasn't because he didn't want to deal with animal control. It was because he'd been honoring a 15-year-old promise to Eleanor to keep Luna safe from the very people who now sought to reclaim her. But the most damning revelation came in Martinez's recent correspondence, which Eleanor had somehow obtained through channels that remained unclear. Messages between Martinez and undisclosed foreign contacts revealed her true motivation for reclaiming Luna. The current Dr. Martinez wasn't interested in Luna for national security reasons. She wanted to reverse engineer Eleanor's successful breeding protocols to create a new generation of wolf hybrids for sale to private military contractors and foreign governments. "She's not working for the U.S. government anymore," Marcus realized, his face pale with the implications. "Those federal credentials, they're either forged or she's operating without authorization. Martinez is trying to steal Luna for her own purposes." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and terror. If Martinez was operating outside official channels, then Luna wasn't actually government property, and the federal seizure order was invalid. But it also meant they were dealing with someone willing to forge federal documents and impersonate government officials, someone who wouldn't hesitate to use more extreme measures if legal channels failed. The sound of vehicles in Eleanor's driveway made both Sarah and Marcus freeze. Through the lace curtains, they could see 2 black SUVs pulling up to the house, their government plates clearly visible even in the evening light. Martinez had arrived ahead of schedule, and she wasn't alone. "They're here for the files," Marcus said grimly. Martinez must have realized Eleanor was the leak, that she was the one who documented the program's abuses. Sarah quickly gathered the most incriminating documents, stuffing them into a manila envelope while Marcus peered through the curtains at the approaching figures. Martinez was accompanied by 4 men in tactical gear who moved with the precision of private military contractors rather than federal agents. "Back door," Marcus whispered urgently. "We need to get these files to someone who can validate them officially." As they crept through Eleanor's kitchen toward the rear exit, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message that made her heart stop. The message was from an unknown number, but the content was unmistakably threatening. "Return the animal and documents within 24 hours or face consequences beyond legal action. We know where you live, where you work, and who you care about." The escalation from bureaucratic pressure to direct threats confirmed their worst fears about Martinez's desperation. Luna represented more than just a valuable research subject. She was the key to a lucrative black market operation that Martinez had been planning for years. They slipped out through Eleanor's back garden just as the front door splintered under what sounded like a battering ram. The men searching Eleanor's house weren't bothering with legal niceties like search warrants. They were operating under the assumption that no one would question federal authority, especially in a small town like Durango. As they made their way through the darkness toward Marcus's vehicle, parked several blocks away to avoid detection, Sarah clutched the envelope of documents that could save Luna while simultaneously destroying any illusion she'd had about the benevolence of government research programs. Eleanor's life's work had been perverted into something monstrous, and now the elderly woman lay dying in a hospital bed while the person responsible for that perversion hunted for the evidence of her crimes. "Where do we take this?" Sarah asked as they reached Marcus's truck. Marcus started the engine, his face set with the determination of someone who'd finally chosen which side of the law he wanted to serve. "I have a contact at the FBI field office in Denver, someone who specializes in investigating corruption within government agencies." He looked at Sarah with something approaching admiration. "We're going to bring Martinez down, but first we need to make sure Luna is safe." As they drove through the night toward an uncertain confrontation with forces far more dangerous than either had imagined, Sarah realized that saving Luna had become about much more than keeping a beloved animal. They were fighting to expose a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government research, to honor Eleanor's sacrifice, and to prevent other animals from suffering the same fate as Luna's forgotten siblings. The documents in Sarah's lap represented both vindication and condemnation, proof that Luna deserved protection and evidence that the cost of that protection might be higher than any of them had anticipated. The courthouse in Durango had never seen anything like the crowd that gathered on the morning of Luna's final hearing. Word had spread through social media after Emma Thompson's TikTok video went viral overnight. A heartfelt plea from an autistic teenager defending the wolf hybrid who had given her back her voice. The hashtag #SaveLuna had exploded across platforms, drawing supporters from across the country who saw in Luna's story a symbol of love triumphing over bureaucracy. Judge Patricia Roberts, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who had presided over Durango County's courts for 20 years, surveyed the packed courtroom with a mixture of curiosity and concern. She had reviewed the mountain of evidence that Marcus Thompson and FBI agent David Chen had presented the night before, documents that revealed Dr. Elena Martinez's fraudulent federal credentials and her illegal attempts to steal Luna for private research contracts. Agent Chen, who happened to be Eleanor's nephew and had been investigating government research corruption for years, had worked through the night to verify the authenticity of Eleanor's hidden files. The evidence was overwhelming. Martinez had been operating without any federal authority for the past 5 years, using forged credentials to intimidate local officials into compliance with her demands. Sarah sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she watched Luna's transport cage being wheeled into the courtroom. The wolf hybrid had been in county custody since yesterday's dramatic confrontation at Eleanor's house, and Sarah's heart ached at the sight of Luna's obvious distress. The animal's mismatched eyes searched the crowd until they found Sarah, and the relief in that gaze was unmistakable. Eleanor's wheelchair was positioned directly beside Sarah, the elderly woman having insisted on being discharged from the hospital against all medical advice. She wore a portable oxygen tank and her face remained pale from her recent cardiac episode, but her eyes burned with a determination that made her seem far younger than her 72 years. "Your Honor," Sarah began when called to speak, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "This isn't just about one animal. This is about what kind of people we choose to be when love meets the law. Luna isn't a research subject or government property. She's a living being who has spent 15 years proving that she belongs with people who care about her, not in a laboratory." Judge Roberts listened intently as Sarah recounted Luna's story, from her rescue on Highway 550 to her therapeutic impact on Emma Thompson, from Eleanor's revelations about the original research program to Martinez's fraudulent attempts at seizure. The narrative that emerged was one of redemption and healing, of an animal who had survived horrors to become a bridge between the human and wild worlds. Marcus Thompson took the stand next, his testimony carrying the weight of someone who had undergone a profound transformation. "Your Honor, I came to this case with 15 years of bias and fear. I saw Luna as a threat because of my own childhood trauma, but watching her interaction with my autistic daughter, seeing the gentleness and intelligence she displayed, made me realize that fear was blinding me to something beautiful." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. Emma hadn't spoken in 3 years. 3 years of silence, of isolation, of watching my daughter slip further away from me every day. Luna gave her back her voice in a single afternoon. That's not the behavior of a dangerous predator. That's the behavior of a healer. Eleanor's testimony was the most powerful, delivered in a whisper that required the court reporter to move closer to catch every word. She spoke of her decades of guilt over the research program, of the animals who had died because of her scientific arrogance, and of Luna as the sole survivor of an experiment that had gone tragically wrong. "I spent 15 years believing all the animals were dead," Eleanor said, her eyes never leaving Luna's cage. Finding out that Luna had survived, that she had been living peacefully all these years, felt like a miracle. She represents not just my chance at redemption, but proof that love and patience can heal even the deepest wounds. The defense that Martinez's lawyer presented was clinical and cold, focused on property rights and federal jurisdiction. But when pressed for documentation of Martinez's current federal employment, the lawyer's confident demeanor cracked. Agent Chen's investigation had revealed that Martinez had been terminated from government service 5 years earlier for ethics violations, and her current research activities were entirely unauthorized. Judge Roberts called a brief recess to review the FBI's evidence in her chambers. When she returned, her expression was grave but resolute. "This court has reviewed extensive documentation regarding the animal in question and the circumstances of her placement with Dr. Mitchell," Judge Roberts began. "The evidence clearly shows that the individual claiming federal authority over this animal was operating under fraudulent credentials and had no legal right to demand the animal's surrender." Sarah felt her heart skip as hope began to bloom in her chest. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "the testimony regarding this animal's therapeutic value, particularly with regard to Miss Emma Thompson's autism treatment, demonstrates a clear public benefit to allowing the current placement to continue. However, Colorado law regarding wolf hybrids remains clear. Such animals cannot be kept as pets without proper permits and facilities. The courtroom held its breath as Judge Roberts delivered her final ruling. Therefore, this court grants Dr. Mitchell 90 days to obtain proper permits and establish appropriate facilities for the care of Luna. During this period, Luna will remain in Dr. Mitchell's custody under court supervision. The county will work with Dr. Mitchell to ensure all legal requirements are met while preserving the therapeutic relationship that has been established. The courtroom erupted in cheers and applause. Sarah burst into tears of relief as Eleanor reached over to squeeze her hand with surprising strength. Marcus was embracing his daughter Emma, who had been watching the proceedings with the focused attention of someone whose entire world depended on the outcome. "But, Your Honor," Sarah said, rising from her seat, "I don't have the financial resources to build proper facilities or maintain the permits. The costs are beyond anything I can afford." Eleanor's voice cut through the courtroom noise with surprising clarity. "Judge Roberts, if I may?" When the judge nodded, Eleanor continued, "I would like to formally donate my property at 1247 Maple Street to Dr. Mitchell for the purpose of establishing a licensed wildlife sanctuary. The property includes 5 acres of fenced land and a house that can be converted to meet all state requirements for wolf hybrid care." The generosity of Eleanor's gift left Sarah speechless. The elderly woman was giving her not just a home for Luna, but a chance to build something larger. A sanctuary where other animals like Luna could find peace and healing. Judge Roberts smiled, the first time her stern expression had softened during the entire proceedings. "It appears the court's concerns about facilities have been addressed. Dr. Mitchell, you have 90 days to complete the legal requirements. This case is closed." As Luna's transport cage was opened and the wolf hybrid bounded toward Sarah with obvious joy, the courtroom witnessed something extraordinary. The reunion of 2 souls who had found each other against impossible odds and refused to let bureaucracy tear them apart. 1 year later, Luna's sanctuary had become a beacon of hope in Durango, drawing visitors from across the country who came to witness the miracle of healing that had transformed an entire community. Eleanor, now 73 and moving slower but with a heart full of purpose, watched from her porch as Sarah trained the newest arrival, a retired military dog with PTSD who had found peace in Luna's gentle presence. The sanctuary housed 12 animals now, each one a bridge between brokenness and wholeness, each one proof that love really could overcome the most impossible circumstances. Emma Thompson visited every weekend, her autism no longer a barrier to connection, but simply another way of seeing the world's beauty. Marcus had resigned from Wildlife Services to become the sanctuary's security coordinator, finally understanding that protection meant nurturing rather than controlling. And Sarah, no longer the isolated young woman who had once measured her worth in unpaid bills, had discovered that family wasn't about blood or species. It was about showing up when someone's world fell apart. The Victorian house that had once echoed with loneliness now rang with laughter, barking, and the sound of healing happening one connection at a time. Sometimes the greatest rescues weren't about saving animals. They were about animals saving us. What moments in your life have taught you that love can triumph over the most impossible circumstances? Have you ever experienced unexpected family connections that changed everything for you? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear how hope found its way into your life when you needed it most.